Hello friends, welcome here or welcome back. My name is Sarah and today we are talking about books. 2024 has been a relatively strong reading year for me so far, and I'm so excited to share with you what I've managed to get through in the first 2 months of the year. For those unfamiliar with my reading wrap-ups, I tend to film my reviews just after I finish my book throughout the month. Today's video is actually going to be doing January and February together because at the end of January I hadn't really read as much as I hoped I would. However, I made up for that in the month of February. So without further ado, get comfy, grab yourself a heartwarming drink of choice, and let's get to talking about books. So my first read of 2024 is Big Magic: Creative Living Beyond Fear by Elizabeth Gilbert. Now, for those of you who watch this channel, you may recall that this was actually my non-fiction book of the year for 2023. And after filming that video, I realised that I'd really quite like to revisit that book, especially at the beginning of a new year. I'd highly recommend this book for anybody who particularly has decided to embark on a creative endeavour or just try something new as a New Year's resolution, to read this book because I really do think that you would be able to get something out of it. This is a book that is all about encouraging you and informing you on the best ways and the most important things to look out for when living a creative life. If you're someone that struggles with perfectionism, or if you have imposter syndrome in the creative industry or just in creative hobbies, I would highly recommend this book for you. Elizabeth Gilbert goes through her own experiences as a writer and the anecdotes and the lessons that she's learned. She also draws on other experiences from other creatives, and there are some wonderful and really fun stories in this book. If you're looking for something encouraging, informative, fun, and just something to kind of get the ball rolling and really motivate you to continue on with any creative ventures, then this is a book that I would definitely recommend. And I've read this 2 years in a row now, and I can definitely say I will be reading or listening to this again. I also have The Toymakers by Robert Dinsdale to talk about today too. This is a historical magical realism novel set in the 1900s in London, and we go from prior to World War I all the way through to after the Second World War. The book revolves around Papa Jack's Emporium, which is this magical toy shop in London, owned by Papa Jack, who is also known as Jakob Godman, and is inhabited by his two rivaling sons, Emil and Caspar, as well. We're introduced to these characters through our lead called Kathy, who is a runaway from her small town after she falls pregnant and is looking for somewhere safe to go. And we are brought into their world through her relationships with them and with the Emporium itself. This was a book with a lot of promise. On the back, it describes the Emporium of capturing imagination of children and adults, patchwork dogs that seem alive, toy boxes that are bigger on the inside, and soldiers that can fight on their own. So the whole premise of the book was very magical and whimsical, and it does have that element going the whole way through it. However, it also jumped around a lot. The pacing was a little bit off for me, and I just thought it was really trying to do a little bit too much in the time that was allocated to the story. For starters, the time period itself crosses over 60 years. It's a really long time to cram into a book this big, and bearing in mind that probably at least a third of the book is just when we meet Kathy in her initial age and Emil and Caspar, where they're ranging from kind of 15 to 19 years old, and for the rest of the book we are then kind of progressing through a 40-year time span, which is quite the task. The author also tries to make parallels between war and soldiers and toys and toy makers, and kind of escapism and therapy through play. There's a lot about toys coming to life and real magic and that sort of element, which is never really explained. And then also trying to talk about the magic of the mundane, which of course is a very different type of magical realism. And so with the contrast of this magic of the mundane experience and then also real magic happening towards the end of the book, it didn't have the same believability that a lot of fantasy and magical realism books can achieve. There was a real kind of disconnect that was happening for me. And then partner that with some of the characters being incredibly frustrating or quite annoying, at times this book did feel quite tedious. I'd probably give it somewhere between the realm of 2.5 to 3 stars, just because of the inconsistencies. I really liked the idea of this book. I liked what the author was trying to do. It was incredibly ambitious, and I have to respect the attempt. I think it was a really interesting concept. It definitely had an element of fairy tale and enchantment to it, but it just didn't quite hit right for me, and is honestly not a book that I think is particularly going to stick with me. Alrighty, so the third book I would like to talk about is The Confession by Jessie Burton. This is a historical fiction novel with a dual timeline narrative in which we follow 2 women. The first woman that we meet is Elise, a slightly lost young woman who meets a well-known, enigmatic, very charismatic writer called Constance Holden. These 2 quickly strike up a relationship, and this timeline is mainly set in 1980s London and then later Los Angeles. Our other main character is Rose Simmons, who from the outset we find out is the abandoned baby or the abandoned daughter of Elise. This is the kind of current day timeline, and she too is also living a slightly uneventful life and feeling a little bit lost. Because she is craving connection with her mother so much, in this strange turn of events, she ends up becoming the personal assistant and typist to the present day Constance Holden, and starts to gain her trust working as her personal assistant. She does this in the hope of finding out any information about her mother, as Constance was the last person to see her alive. This is a really wonderful book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It has a lot of tension, quite a lot of mystery, and a real focus on women and friendship and kind of chosen family. It's a slow build but incredibly atmospheric, and all the characters are lovable but also very flawed too. This novel has quite a similar feel to one of Jessie Burton's earlier novels called The Muse, which I read last year and absolutely devoured. I thought that book was fantastic. This one didn't have quite the same amount of drama. It has similar parallels though, and overall I thoroughly enjoyed this book. The next book has quite a long title, so I am going to read it from the screen here. It is The Swedish Art of Aging Well, Life Wisdom from Someone Who Will Probably Die Before You by Margareta Magnusson. Margareta's previous book has been really popular and is all about Swedish death cleaning, and she kind of popularised that. And this book kind of bounces off the back of that one and is full of personal anecdotes, musings, wisdom, all from her own life experiences and story. It ranges from the trivial and light-hearted all the way to the more meaningful and more philosophical ideas, or things that are a bit more hard-hitting. So we have a whole section which talks about her love of striped things, and conversely another about going into a care home, accepting the inevitability of death, and everything in between. She also has such a brilliant sense of humour, which often just kind of comes out of nowhere throughout her stories, and I just love that. I thoroughly enjoy listening to other people's stories and what wisdom they can impart to us and what they want to share with us. And I listened to this on an audiobook, and I just really enjoyed my walks to and from work and running my errands with Margareta keeping me company. I do think it's such a special thing to be able to listen to what an elderly person has to say, and I think quite often we don't give enough credit and we don't give enough of a voice to people in much older generations from ourselves. So this felt really special, and it sort of felt a bit like a gift, and I really liked it. The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk is the next book I would like to talk about. This is a fantasy historical romance set in the Regency era in an alternate universe. We follow Beatrice Claiborne, who is the eldest daughter of a wealthy and respectable family. The family is unfortunately in severe debt, and the only way that they can think to solve this problem is to marry Beatrice to a suitable husband who will get them out of their financial situation. However, Beatrice is also a very powerful sorceress, and in this universe, women are expected to wear a collar once married, which kind of suppresses their power and they're unable to perform magic. We're told in the book that this is to prevent children that women may be carrying from becoming possessed by spirits. But anyway, Beatrice understandably doesn't want this to happen and is convinced that she can teach herself how to advance to a mage, which is a position that is only afforded to men at this time, and is also something that would prevent men from wanting to marry her as well. While attempting to get her hands on the grimoire that she needs to advance this, she encounters the wealthy Isbeta Lavan and her brother Ianthe. Isbeta and Beatrice strike up a deal, with Beatrice promising to help the other woman also find her path in magic, and there is also a blossoming romance unfolding throughout the novel too. To me, the magic was interesting, but the main point and the main narrative thread of the book seemed to me more of a social commentary on women's lack of autonomy over their bodies, traditional marriage ideas, and honestly birth control, which of course was a very current issue when this was published and still is to this day. And I really respected the author for doing that. I feel like that's something that isn't often discussed, especially in fantasy literature. The Regency time period lent itself well to this. I also think that Polk's ideas could have been a bit more impactful if they were a bit more subtle. A lot of the commentary was expressed by dialogue said against or by the women in the book, and instances where actions and scenarios were firstly used were often followed up with verbal explanations which simply weren't needed, and there just seemed to be this distrust in the reader understanding the context and what the author was trying to say. I enjoyed the premise and the characters and of course the Regency era, but I feel like being a bit less heavy-handed could have led to a much more impactful story and writing style. I would recommend this if you enjoyed Bridgerton, but you're looking for a non-spicy alternative. This is a kind of wholesome fantasy version instead. The next book I read was Mrs. England by Stacey Halls. This is a historical fiction novel set in the Edwardian era in the UK, and we follow our main character, Ruby May. Ruby has trained as a children's nurse or a nanny at a prestigious institution. Unlike the other students, we can tell that Nurse May has not had an easy or privileged upbringing, but nevertheless she thrives in her job. After leaving the previous family that she was working for, she quickly is found new employment with the England family. The warm, affable Charles England and his very distant and withdrawn wife Lillian live a pretty isolated life, and Ruby soon realizes that something is not quite right with the mistress and the household. Lillian shows little to no interest in her children, and through different events and strange happenings, Ruby begins to think that something may be going on, as well as fearing for the children that she is being paid to care for. This book is full of slow burning tension with lots of gothic tropes littered throughout. From the house itself and the landscape to the isolation and the sense of foreboding, plus so much of the plot takes place in the house and the grounds of the house itself that it has this slightly more claustrophobic feel to it, and that just elevates and strengthens the tension and the apprehension and the anticipation that is going on throughout the book. I would say that this book discusses marriage, it discusses power and control, courage, deception, truth, and how it can be manipulated. It also looks a little bit at class and kind of societal expectations, and with all Stacey Hall's novels, she always leans into this idea of female allyship and friendship, and this book is no exception. I enjoyed this book a lot. I would give it 4 stars, and I would especially recommend it to be read during these colder, darker months, which I think are just so perfect for reading Gothic literature. And this is a really nice newer take on that. It's not too dark, but it's still got that sort of menacing feel, with lots of tension and lots of characters that you want to root for as well. So I really liked this book a lot, and once again Stacey Halls has knocked out the park for me. So yesterday I finished reading Son of the Shadows by Juliette Marillier. This is the second book in the Seven Waters trilogy and follows on with the family of Saoirse, who was our protagonist in the first book in the trilogy called Daughter of the Forest. In Son of the Shadows, we follow Liaden or Liaden, the youngest daughter of Saoirse, who has inherited her mother's abilities for healing and to seeing into the spirit world. The spirits warn Liaden that she must remain at Seven Waters in order for them to reclaim the sacred isles from the Britons. But things go a little bit awry when she is captured by a group of mercenaries headed up by someone called the Painted Man, who is renowned and feared for his and his men's skills. However, his reputation isn't completely true, and despite herself, Leodin finds herself drawn to him despite the warning of the prophecy. Like Daughter of the Forest, Son of the Shadows is steeped in folklore and quests, complex characters, violence, familial love, betrayal, and so much more. The magic is all inspired by fae and fairy tales and is very otherworldly, and Juliet Marillier has such an incredible way of describing a sense of place. The landscapes and the homes are intricately woven together in a book that ends up feeling a lot like a fable or something that would be told around a campfire. In this story, there are many continuations from the first book. There is still the overarching mission to protect Seven Waters, and the conflict between the Irish and the British rages on as they battle to defend their land. The roles of the family have of course shifted a little bit, as all of the brothers from the first book now appear as uncles, and we also get to see how Red has integrated into his new family and his new role as well. Juliet Marillier does not shy away from the cruelties of the world in her writing, and so this novel does discuss some more uncomfortable things like childhood and domestic abuse, as well as torture and death, and she does also describe killing in some detail, so this book may not be for everyone. However, as with the previous instalment, all of these unpleasant moments do serve to deepen and further the plot, so there is no violence just for the sake of it in this book. It's also full of asides of detailed folklore and legends, which, although sometimes felt a little bit tedious, ultimately added to the overall shape of the story and overall just helped to create a ambience to the narrative. Although I didn't love it quite as much as Daughter of the Forest, I still thoroughly enjoyed this book and all of its characters, and I will definitely be picking up the final instalment very soon. Next, we have The Little Grey Men by B.B. And no, before you ask, I have no idea what B.B. stands for. This is a children's book. It is very much vibes, no plot. We follow three gnomes as they explore the woods around where they live, and they go on a big adventure trying to locate their lost brother. It is full of really cute and fun interactions with the animals and the area, and it's just a classic little adventure story. It has some really sweet illustrations throughout it as well, and it's just a lovely, quaint little book. Nothing much really going on, but very enjoyable, especially I think as we're coming up to the spring and the summertime. But yeah, it was really sweet and I really enjoyed it, and the cover is really, really lovely. Look! The Girl of Ink and Stars by Kieran Millward Hargrave is a gorgeous middle grade fantasy book full of folklore and magic. We follow Isabella, a cartographer's daughter, who lives on the small island of Joya, which is under the dictatorship of the governor, where there are rules in place to stop the inhabitants from exploring certain areas or leaving the island. Although the governor is a harsh man, his daughter Lupe is Isabella's best friend. Following the murder of their school friend, the two girls quarrel about their differences in station and lifestyle, and Isabella ends up saying some pretty hurtful things to Lupe. This results in Lupe going off and trying to find the killer herself in the Forgotten Territories in an attempt to show that not everybody in her family is rotten. Isabella obviously regrets her words, and she decides to join the search party in order to find her friend. In doing so, she also finally gets the chance to map the Forbidden Territories and the places that she's never been allowed to go before. Although technically, yes, this is a children's book, it is not lacking in adventure and is very, very quickly paced and full of action. There's plenty of incredible imagery and lots of myth and lovely characters as well to round it out. I have adored Kieran Millward Hargrave's writing for adults. The Mercies and The Dance Tree were two of my top books that I read last year, and she just possesses this unique ability to create really vivid and very tangible atmospheres within her writing, and that translates into her children's literature too. I loved all the intricacies of the different environments, from the map making supplies to how the door looked to the maze or the daedalo that runs underneath the island, and of course all the wonderful mythical aspects as well. It was just a wonderful read, and I would definitely recommend this for children and adults alike. Lastly, we have How to Calm Your Mind, Finding Presence and Productivity in Anxious Times by Chris Bailey. The title of this book really does sum up what it is about. Chris Bailey is a productivity expert and wrote this book after an onstage panic attack forced him to slow down and reevaluate his work-life balance. This is a non-fiction book about achieving calm, navigating anxiety, and staving off burnout. It has a particular emphasis on the impact of the digital world in our everyday lives and has lots of interesting and well-researched information in here about that specifically and how it impacts our stress levels and our levels of calm as well. I found that this book was full of helpful reminders as well as encouragement to challenge yourself. And although I would say that this is still a productivity book at heart, it is really refreshing to see a book that is not coming from an angle of hustle culture. If you're struggling with stress levels, you're feeling like you may be approaching a burnout, or you're just looking for calm in the everyday, this is a book that may be helpful. If you're someone that is just finding yourself being a little bit more anxious than usual, it may be worth a read, and I certainly feel like I've learned quite a lot of information from this and improvements that I can make in my own daily life now too. And that concludes today's video. Thank you so much for being here. Let me know what you are reading and enjoying in the comments below if you so wish. Take care, and I will see you in another video very soon. Goodbye.